Afternoon, Mary Russell, Sherlock Holmes, and all other creatures that have been recounted in the extensive works of Laurie R King. We are today doing the virtual launch for the new Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes book called Riviera Gold. And you can see, a copy from our author. Look at there. Hi, Laurie.
Hey,
Lovely to see you. I'm so glad we get a chance to do this, even if virtual is not nearly as wonderful as actually being here.
well, yeah, except it's 110 there.
Oh, quibble. You've been here forever when it's been 110. Don't give me that. But we also
That's
have
true.
other things we can talk about. And in fact, before we do, I'm looking at a copy of Mary Russell's War, which is a book very dear to my heart. And you
Yeah.
have actually been using it for an altruistic purpose, if I recall. A story therein, right?
All right, Mrs. Hudson's case.
Yes.
It was funny because, you always try and do, I don't know if you want to call it promotion or tie-ins or just getting a conversation going, but you look at the characters that are going to be in that book and you try and find a new way of talking about them for people. And it occurred to me that, oh, hey, I have this short story that's about Mrs. Hudson that I wrote in the mid 90s, and it was in Sharon Newman and Mimi Manfredo did a collection, and I think it was the first time anyone had ever asked me to write a short story. So I wrote a short story called Mrs. Hudson's Case about Mrs. Hudson and two missing children, and the case being her sewing case. So I thought, wasn't there a short story that I wrote about Mrs. Hudson? And I went looking for it, and of course it's in Mary Russell's War, which is published in paperback by
Poison Pen Press.
Poison Pen Press. Yay! And I found this thing, and I thought, well, probably it being 20 years ago, there's not really anything in it that would tie in with the current books because Riviera Gold has a lot to do with Mrs. Hudson, and it plays heavily on the second to last one, which is the murder of Mary Russell, which had a lot to do with Mrs. Hudson's racy past. But I thought that short story was written a long time ago, and I really hadn't a clue of what I was doing with that character or where she was going, because some of us don't write to a kind of overall arc. So
Some of us just make it up as we go along, right? Yes.
some of us just kind of tell ourselves stories, and then it works. Yay! But I went back and looked at it, and I thought, that's my Mrs. Hudson in 1996, 97. Here she is, and she asks Sherlock Holmes to help her figure something out, and he's far too busy, and Mary Russell is off in Oxford, and so she just sort of says, all right, I'll do it myself. And she's just such, you get this hint of there's this character there who really knows how to sort of put it to Sherlock Holmes in some interesting ways. So there you are. So long story short here, I gave it away. I did an illustrated version. I invited people to send in their illustrations. The people that I ended up using for the illustrations in the story, I sent a copy of the hardback to, and we put it up on the website, so you can download the illustrated Mrs. Hudson's Case, which has one of the better pictures of Mary Russell that I have ever received. Most pictures of Mary Russell, especially from the publisher's art department, do not show her glasses. That apparently people have problems drawing glasses. But there have been a couple of amateur pictures of Mary Russell that show her glasses that I just adore, and this is one of them is in there. So, a long story short, Mrs. Hudson's Case on the website, or I think it's on the Mary Russell's War book page on my site.
Excellent. Well, that's a full explanation. Thank you very much.
I know. Who knew?
This book is especially dear to my heart for two reasons. One, if you recall, if you've been reading all the way from The Beekeeper's Apprentice forward, that Laurie elided over the actual marriage of Sherlock Holmes and Mary Russell, not wishing to get into sex or honeymoon scenes. But there is, in fact, coward. There is, in fact, a the wedding of Mary Russell in one of these, and the other is, which I have said ad nauseum, but I have to repeat it. Laurie kindly wrote one story for me because I nagged her forever about using a title that her publisher rejected for which book was it?
I think it was Justice Hall.
Yes, for Justice Hall, because Laurie's working title for that book was Stately Homes, which I thought was beyond brilliant. And so I persecuted her for years about not writing Stately Homes. So she did write a story in the Mary Russell's War volume just to shut me up, right?
Stately Holmes, and the reason he is very stately is that he's had his he is wearing a brace on his injured back. So he's very stately.
Got it. Well, one of the great things about Riviera Gold, Laurie and my husband Robert and I made a trip to Japan together in 2012, which was, quote, research for a Mary Russell book. And so that went so well, we thought we'd do it again. But this time we went to Romania, and then we went down to the Black Sea and floated up the lower Danube to Budapest, went on to Vienna, and then Laurie left us to go to Monaco. Imagine that. But that too was going to be a research trip, was it?
It was absolutely, and I didn't know it at the time, but I sort of knew it at the time, but I decided it was going to be research, and it was interesting, because Monaco is this tiny little country, and it's little more than a port. It has this fascinating history of double dealing and corruption that you couldn't make it up for a story, because your editor would say this is really not believable. But the Grimaldi family originally sneaks into the fort dressed as Jesuit monks and pull their swords and take the country. So it's kind of gone that way ever since. And so in the murder of Mary Russell, Mrs. Hudson has been accused of murder, and she has to flee England. So the last they see of her, Russell says, "I have to know where you're going." And Mrs. Hudson says, "I've always been fond of Monte Carlo." Well, it was a sort of throwaway line at the time. But then I thought, well, why not? Because she has this racy past. It would be fitting for her to go to a place like Monte Carlo, which is part of Monaco. So when Russell and Holmes leave Venice after Island of the Mad, Russell takes off on a sailboat with a friend, and Holmes goes off on some mysterious task that we will find out about later. And one of the things that takes Russell onto this boat is the fact they're going to end up in the south of France, because she thinks, south of France is not far from Monaco, right? I could just sort of drop in and happen to see if Mrs. Hudson's there. So that's the beginning of the book.
I really liked it. In fact, if I remember, that it was a kind of why not moment for her. Holmes has gone off, and there she is in Venice, and this guy comes along. She
doesn't really want to go back to Sussex because it's empty. Mrs. Hudson isn't there, and Mrs. Hudson has been the sort of emotional center of her life since they met when she was 15. And to have Mrs. Hudson missing is really more than she can face at the moment. So off she goes.
Indeed, and hardens herself up. Her hands become callous working the ropes and all, and so they sail into Monaco. Now, let's talk about the 1920s, because the 1920s are a really interesting bubble in time between the two wars, or between the First War and the miseries of the 1930s. So to write about it is, it may feel, especially at the moment, as though it's kind of shallow and, superficial and all the rest of it, but actually it's an enormously creative time. And you populate this book with a huge number of creative personalities that all kind of convene on the south of France, on the Riviera.
Yeah. There is a married couple named Sarah and Gerald Murphy who kind of appear very briefly in Island of the Mad, because they were with Cole Porter and his wife, the beginning of the summer. This is 1925. And when I was researching that book and then this one, I became fascinated by the Murphys because Gerald himself was a very fine painter. He only produced maybe 9 paintings, of which there's, I think, 8 still in existence. But their real art was community, building a community. And what happened after the Great War is that all these Americans who had happened to join the war, join the army, passed through Paris on various leaves, really fell in love with Paris. And after the war, between the U.S.'s experiment with prohibition and the exchange rate, they decided that they could as easily do their art in Paris. So you get this first trickle and then flood of artists and writers who go into Paris because the exchange rate is great, the morals are really attractive, and there's a lot of freedom. Among them, Cyril and Gerard Murphy, who, unlike many of the others, are slightly older and have 3 kids. They discover the Riviera in 1923. The Porters invite them down. The Porters never seem to go back, but Gerald and Sarah fall in love with it, buy a house, start inviting their friends down in the summers. And so you get this change in the Riviera because of the American expats from being a strictly winter holiday place to being a year-round place, because this is the time of when the suntan, Le Bronzette, becomes popular. Coco Chanel comes off of, which Duke is it? Anyway, one of the Duke's yachts where she's been sailing around browning herself and creates a sensation because women didn't do that. And you get this community of artists and writers who center around Paris, and then at this time, in 1925, are centering down in the Riviera as a community, and they are brought together by the Murphys, as indeed are Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes.
Indeed so. He was the Duke of Westminster, in point of fact.
Yes.
That Coco had as a, well, we won't even speculate what their relationship was, but this is also when women cut their hair and raised their skirts, and you could wear a bathing costume that you could swim in, and you didn't have to be inside a little wooden hut drawn into the water by horses and all that Victorian stuff and earlier. And really, Laurie, thinking about it, what happened at the Riviera is sort of what's happened to great ski resorts, because for years people only went to ski resorts in the winter to ski, but now they have a whole summer population where people can ride chairlifts and hike around the countryside and use the facilities, and so they're now year round. And from a kind of sleepy summer, places like the Hotel du Cap and Antibes and that whole Riviera really boomed. And over in Monte Carlo was the casino. A casino was a place where people could, gamble, meet friends, do all that sort of thing.
And conceal their money.
Yes. But I love the fact that in this book there are so many interesting characters, not just Americans, but we have Picasso, we have Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda, we have other artists I've rarely heard of, and you apparently have mastered bronze by you've written into this book the Foundry, which is a hellish place to be in hot weather. But I gather that you must have actually researched a real foundry. I've been in one in New Mexico in the summer. The Metropolitan Opera does trips to the Santa Fe Opera, and the first one I went on, they took us to a foundry in New Mexico in the summer. So I really related to your scenes, which are crucial to the book, in point of fact. The bronze art.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really interested in, partly it ties in with the plot, which we're not going to give spoilers, so we won't talk about that. But I was interested in the different variety of art forms that came out then, because for example, African art had come up from, the Benin area, and really changed how Picasso, for one,
Right.
looked at sculpture and looked at faces. I don't think that he would have become the kind of abstract artist that he did had it not been for African bronzes in particular. So the bronze work that goes on in there, it's indeed, I researched it with there's a guy here in Santa Cruz. He and his assistant did a pour for me, and I made a bronze pour blog post recently that you can find on the blog with bits of film and a lot of photographs, because it's really interesting how you first make the wax shape and then you make the form, and then you have to tie the form together so that the bronze goes in and fills it up, but you can break it off, and then it's hollow. This is hollow, and that's anyway. It's just a fascinating process that I look at. I have a bronze Ganesh that I bought in India many years ago, and I have to say I look at it very differently now. Looking for where the little connecting rods are.
Absolutely. Well, as any, and this doesn't really have anything to do with the plot, or if it does, I'm not going to tell you. But it's certainly handy when you're writing a crime to have, a furnace and high heat and other potential, other potential things that can play into a crime novel. Whether they do or not in this book, we won't say. But I did like the fact that we are talking about writers, we're talking about painters, we're talking about sculptors, we're talking about a variety of art.
Dance as well.
Yep, and a variety of influences. But we're also talking about money because, one of the functions that has kept the Principality of Monaco going is money, banking and sort of a refuge for rich people to squander money. I mean, today it's very much looked at that way. Probably more money per square inch in Monaco than almost anywhere.
Yeah. It was really extraordinary to be there, because I'm not normally really aware of my economic status, but I have to say that when I was there, I felt like a cleaning woman.
Yes, and one either, well, maybe today one doesn't have to dress the part in the way, because even rich people now are going around in sweats, or leisure wear, but certainly for a long time, I think that just what you wore would have been significant if you were, on the street. I remember a song that my grandmother used to sing to me, and it was and I don't remember the entire song, but the thrust of it was about the man who broke the bank at Monte Carlo. Which
the bank, Monte Carlo.
Exactly, which was basically like winning the lottery, and so it became a real symbol, as you say, for American expats right through the 60s, probably. I don't know if it's so much so today.
In 1925, it was slightly run down. It was past its late 19th century glory days. It was not yet rediscovered. It was partly good old Elsa Maxwell, who had a lot to do with Venice, and the last book, The Island of the Mad. She appears in that. She's brought in the following year after this book is written, and reforms a lot of the attitudes towards Monaco that aren't yet there in 1925. In 1925, it's still a sort of old-fashioned place with a lot of sad Russians around, and it's got this really kind of shady background. For one thing, the character that I use in there, Basil Zakharov, lives there, who is the most ghastly arms dealer who built up the First World War and made. He was perhaps the third wealthiest person in the world in 1925, maybe the fourth. But, to have that kind of person in your principality must have been really disturbing for anyone with ethics.
Well, I'm not sure ethics were the determinant, and that kind of money produces its own kind of awe, and it becomes like a living character. I think Elsa Maxwell is completely fascinating. A triumph of self-invention, a really homely woman who somehow managed to become like the epicenter of the fashionable crowd and so forth. And it must have been from her force of personality, because it certainly didn't have anything to do with, her gorgeous looks or amazing clothes or anything. So I've always found her to be a completely fascinating character.
Yeah, yeah, and she came in and she was hired to do for Monaco basically what she had done for the Lido in Venice, and so she made it into a healthy place and gave games to play and spiffed up things, and so.
She was a social influencer, is what it really comes down to. In an age of Instagram, she would have had to use screens because she was so homely. But aside from that, this is a woman who really did understand social influencing and got paid for it. A pioneer in that whole new career track. That's great. So we don't want to give anything away about the plot, but Russell arrives, and then strange things happen, and Mrs. Hudson may or may not be there, and Sherlock Holmes may or may not show up, but what are the odds, right? And that's probably, yeah, come on. So that's more or less all we can really say about the story. So let me pause and see if we have any questions from Facebook. Ellie, who's monitoring Facebook, are there any questions people would like to ask? She has to read the screen, so it takes a moment.
I'm just seeing a lot of excitement over the new book.
She's seeing lots of excitement, lots of people thrilled to be here, here, so to speak, in our Zoom space, right? And it's exciting because, in fact, the book doesn't publish till Tuesday, so we have a chance to talk about it before you get to read it.
Yeah, if anyone has questions.
This has really been so interesting, this business of having a sort of a launch party that isn't a launch, and to do everything virtually, because I tend to do virtual things, and of course Poison Pen is really great for having stuff that goes online, and if you event you can see it afterwards and all the rest of it. But I was thinking the other day how odd it was to have a book launching on Tuesday, and I'm not having to pack a suitcase. I don't have to worry about somebody to feed the cat while I'm away, sort of thing. Most of my work is done, and I can sit back and talk to Barbara Peters.
And enjoy it. Now, happily, because we were able to work it out, we actually have Riviera Gold, autographed by Laurie, here in the Poison Pen, which we can sell to you on Tuesday, or if you order it now, we can put it in the mail on Monday, so you will get it quite soon. And that has not been, Laurie, a feature of most of these events, because the shipping system is so slow. That we've done many now book launches, virtual book launches with the book, somewhere in transit somewhere. But yours is the rare book that's actually physically here at the Poison Pen today.
And I have to say, I really appreciate it, because you can't have made much money off of each book having to have double shipping. Because it was sent first to me, everyone should know. It was sent first to me, and I signed them and repacked them, and the UPS guy picked them up, and off they went to you. And that they don't give you a freebie stopover like some of the airlines used to. So thank you for absorbing the cost of a double shipping, Barbara.
Well, it's just the way things work at the moment, and I am grateful that you are willing to work with us, and I'm really grateful for all of you out there who have bought a book to make it possible, because at some point you do have to say, can we actually run a bookstore, and can we have conversations with authors like Laurie if there's no recompense, if there's no financial benefit for it. Laurie and I could just do this at home and enjoy each other, because we've been friends for nearly 30 years. But we need to translate that into something that works in a business model and also works for all of you. So I'm really pleased that we can do that. I'm sure it does feel odd in a lot of respects for you.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about it, because normally, today's Saturday. Normally, I would have flown into Phoenix yesterday, hired a car, driven up to you in Scottsdale. We would have had a lovely dinner outside with Rob and other friends, preferably somewhere outside last night in the heat of Scottsdale. And then today we would have gone to the bookstore and I would have signed your books and then we would have done the event. And instead of that, hi.
Yes, it's a new reality for sure. All right, Patrick is now on the case, and Paul the dog, the bookstore dog who makes occasional appearances in our events. He was really cute. He actually had a part of the J.A. Jantz virtual launch we did last Tuesday and was much admired by everybody. So, any actual questions over there?
Not Susan Berman wants to know, has Laurie changed her mind?
Susan Berman would like to know if Laurie's changed her mind. Now, that's a really ambiguous question. What have you been up to? I don't know about, King.
Can I have a hint? I have changed my mind any number of times, but I can't think about anything in particular.
So, Susan, can you be a little more specific? Wait, we have to get an answer here.
I mean, that is really an exciting question, I have to say. But, what did I commit myself to?
Very unnerving, in point of fact, all the way around. Well,
yeah,
may take a moment to get there.
Exactly.
Right. Right. So, California has had a different experience than Arizona, obviously, or any other state. We're all different from the virus. How has Santa Cruz been handling it? Because you're not urban California.
No, we are a fairly lefty, fairly highly educated. I mean, our big industry in Santa Cruz, the north end of the county is the university. South end of the county is strictly agricultural, but yeah, I mean, we have been, I think, very responsible. We've had 200 cases here in Santa Cruz County, and 2 deaths a while ago, nothing recently. Everywhere you go, you see masks. Everywhere you walk, people give you space. I haven't seen anyone get upset about not wearing masks because we're adults here. Funny that. And we tend to shelter in place. I mean, I've got a household with 4 people. 3 of us are 70-ish and older, and so we tend to only go out occasionally. We mask, we glove, we go shopping first thing in the morning, and we don't we don't go in crowds at all.
I always crack up when I talk to you about Santa Fe, because when I was an undergraduate at Stanford, Santa Cruz. Sorry, I meant to say Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz was known to us as the beach. It was the place that we drove across mountains past the dummy highway patrol car, which was there to slow us down. And we had these, beach raves and so forth. The university, I graduated in '62, and I think the university was not founded in Santa Cruz till '67. Do I have that right? Yeah. So it didn't even exist, the big employer. So, it was a very small, kind of sleepy beach town. And, that is hard for me, even all these years later, to think of Santa Cruz as you live in Santa Cruz, because it wasn't like that.
Yeah, when I was here as a kid, it was tourists and Italian fishermen. That was Santa Cruz. So yes, the university has completely turned the city on its head.
So is agriculture, because we thought of Gilroy as the garlic capital. We thought of what is it, the artichoke water. I'm trying to remember the name of the town. Waterville was the artichoke capital, and and California was still so much more agrarian, and you tended to think of places for its agricultural products, whether it was dates or whatever. So it's changed dramatically for over the last decades.
Well, Santa Cruz is an interesting county because, as I said, the north end is the town of Santa Cruz, the tourist area, the university. But South County is strawberries, apples, and flowers. It's mostly Hispanic. My kids grew up down there, and they would be 2 Anglo kids in a class of Hispanic kids. They grew up understanding Spanish. They're not speaking it terribly well. and it was, it was a lovely place for them to grow up and very real compared with this end of the county, which is, a whole different ethnic mix. Um, and it was interesting, I think, for them. Um, I always like to do something like that. The trip that Barbara and Robin and I took, that Barbara mentioned earlier, um, the trip that we took 2 years ago, um, I found really fascinating because Romania was I found Romania really fascinating. It was very, had a kind of 50s feel to it. I mean, Romania went through a terrible period of communism, and it's just, I mean, nobody would wish that on anyone. But they came out of it with this interesting attitude that is very, very rural. And the places that we went to and went through were oddly untouristic. And I think that was the first time you guys had been on that end of the Danube, wasn't it?
Yes, we had been as far down the Danube as Budapest and then further into Hungary, but we had not been to Romania or Bulgaria. We have been around the Black Sea on a completely different trip that was round trip Istanbul. And so we were on coastal Bulgaria where there's an island. I can't remember the name of it. It's like a playground island. I think it starts with a V. That was really fascinating, but nothing like the Bulgaria that we saw on the river. I thought Romania was fascinating, and of course, because of Ceausescu and the communism and the horrible things, it is in a bit of a time warp, and was working hard towards becoming more 21st century. But if you remember when we toured off into villages, I thought one of the things I loved was that the communists tried to provide them with agricultural machinery, and they're back to using animals to work the land. The machinery didn't work for them. So trying to turn Romania into some kind of a Stalin-esque, agricultural compound was a complete failure.
But I love how when they applied for EU membership, the EU said, "Oh, you can't use horses for your plows. Here's a bunch of high tech tractors and so forth." So the Romanians said, "Oh, fine, okay, we'll use those." So they used them, and then they started breaking down. They couldn't get the pieces, so they went back to the horses. Except now it's called sustainable agriculture. and the EU says, "Look at these people, they're doing sustainable agriculture." And the Romanians are saying, "Okay."
Yes, no, I really enjoyed it. I would have spent more time there. The thing I thought was creepy, because we made a trip into Dracula country. Laurie and Rob and I signed up for a side trip so we could drive up into the Carpathian Mountains and visit the great Bram Stoker Dracula sites and all. It turned out that Dracula's castle is complete fake in a lot of respects. But do you remember that there was that amazing, beautiful valley that was filled with this completely dormant factory, and that produced nothing and was built basically to produce nothing, and it's just a horrible eyesore, but they can hardly even afford to break it down and get rid of it, which is what they need to do. But there was such a dissociation between what was real and what that particular government wanted it to do, and they just created this ruin that is now a big problem for them. It accomplished nothing, and it's going to cost a fortune to get rid of it.
Yeah, and there's that kind of thing all over places like Romania. So yeah.
Ellie, did we have any questions, or did Susan Berman come back and say what it was that she wanted Laurie to actually address?
Nope. Kathleen contributed that Castroville was the artichoke.
Oh, it's Castroville. Was that
Yes.
the artichoke? Okay.
Yes.
What am I thinking of? Water? Isn't there a water something or other near Palo Alto that contributed something? Well, I'm sorry. It was like 60 years ago, so I'm a little hazy. What
And
could I say?
Reese Bowen's chiming in,
Hi,
or
Reese.
she's present.
Wonderful. Question for you, or do you just want to lob something at us? That's Reese.
Hi, Reese.
Right.
No, there's been no clarification on the changing the mind question.
Well, you're never going to have to tell us what it is you might have changed your mind on. But why don't we wind this up by
I never change my mind. Absolutely, Susan, I never change my mind.
I've known Laurie for nearly 30 years, and I will say that changing her mind is one of her better qualities, so I'm pretty sure she will.
I have no mind to change, so it's okay.
Now that Riviera Gold is done, what is it you're working on? Because you tend to work in various directions depending on how the mood takes you.
Funny you should ask me, Barbara. We just had title discussions because not only are sales meetings coming up for Random House, but they like to give their art department a title and a sort of vague idea of the book way in advance. I don't know why, but anyway. So we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And would you like a title reveal? Would you like an exclusive title reveal?
Lay it on.
Should I pretend that the microphone is going bad so that people say, "But I wanted to hear the title"?
No.
Okay. Castle Shade.
Wow.
Because it's about Bran Castle, the one that is. I know.
I love it.
I fell in love with Marie, Queen of Romania.
Mm-hmm.
I fell in love with the whole idea that you would gain independence and decide that what you needed was a king, and you drag one in out of Germany, and set up a royal court, and that was your government, and then because you had so many problems within the country, you required your king and your princes to marry outside of Romania. So so they bring in this granddaughter of Queen Victoria, who is also the granddaughter of the Tsar of Russia, and make her, she's the prince's bride and becomes the queen when the king dies. And I just fell in love with this utterly unlikely woman. So the next book is something about Queen Marie of Romania, and set around Bran Castle in what I delighted to hear was called Transylvania. It actually is pronounced Transylvania. No, that's not Bela Lugosi. So there's an exclusive for the Poison Pen listeners.
I'm so delighted to hear this, and let's all hope that Laurie can come here live, or that we can figure out how to do a photograph shuffle as part of the whole deal, because have I ever got photographs of Bran Castle and everything to do with Marie, Queen of Romania, because we spent quite a lot of time in this castle, which in fact was never part of, the whole thing was made up for tourism. That's the part that I just love. People think they're making an authentic pilgrimage to the site of Dracula and Bran Castle, and all. Not at all. And in fact, you have to go to Budapest to really get additional history of, the evil, whatever he was, that Dracula is based on.
Vlad Tepes.
That's it. Vlad the Impaler. Yes, now it comes back to me. So, you guys are lucky that Laurie and I like to travel, because we've certainly managed to come up with some really good books together. I love it.
This one trip that I took, I started in England, went to Romania and Europe, and down to Monte Carlo. I got a short story set in Brighton before we went. The story Riviera Gold set in Monaco, and the next book set in Transylvania. So two novels and a short story so far, out of 1 2-month trip, which is not bad going.
Very good going. We might have to go back and revisit our trip to Japan here to work this out so we get more mileage out of it. So if there are no other questions or comments, Laurie, I'm going to say it was a real treat to visit with you. I'm going to ask all of you to share this with your friends on Facebook or however you'd like to do it. And be sure to remember that you can buy an autographed copy of Riviera Gold from the Poison Pen. There will also be a podcast of this in a day or two, so if you have people who don't want screen time, they can actually just listen to it. How about that?
Yeah.
All right, so farewell.